This hearing of the Committee on Agriculture, Veterans, Broadband, and Rural Development for Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025 is now in session. Welcome back, everybody. It's great to see you again. A couple quick sort of housekeeping moments. One, you see that our title has grown. We have taken on Veterans and Military Affairs into this jurisdiction. Rest assured, those of you who have interests in that area, that we will do our best to make sure that both jurisdictions receive the treatment that they deserve. Practically what that means is that we will have separate hearings for Veterans and Military Affairs than we do for agricultural, broadband, and rural development. That means for our friends in the agricultural community, you might see that there's a week that we don't meet, and that's because we're doing veterans stuff that week. Just so that you know, that's how we're going to be operating moving forward. As curious as that is. So today, we're going to hear a briefing by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and hear a little bit about the great stuff that they're doing. And then we'll hear from the Board of Animal Health. But first, let's all say hi. So we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. Everyone who's on this side of the dais has to say hi and tell us who they are. I'm Eric. I represent Senate District 14, the Greater St. Cloud area, and I'm your ag dude. Let's start over there.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm State Senator Mary Kunish. I represent District 39, which are the communities of St. Anthony Village and New Brighton, Columbia Heights and Hilltop, Spring Lake Park, and Fridley.
Bill Weber, Senate District 21. I represent all or parts of 9 counties in the southwest corner of Minnesota. Good to be back on the Ag Committee. I was a member of the Ag Committee for the first 8 years of my Senate career, and good to be here.
Gene Dornig, District 23, serve all of Freeborn, most of Mauer, and then parts of Steele, Waseca, and Faribault County.
Andy Larson, I am the Republican researcher and committee administrator for this committee.
Torrey Westrom, Senator from Senate District 12, Central and Western Minnesota, towns such as Melrose, Sauk Center, Alexandria, Glenwood, Morris, Benson, Ortonville, and co-chair of the committee as well.
Hello, my name is Eric Olafson, nonpartisan Senate fiscal analyst for this committee.
And I'm Laura Painter. I'm the nonpartisan legislative analyst for the committee.
I'm still Eric.
And I'm Nick Roth. I'm the DFL committee administrator for the committee.
I'm Keely, and I'm the CLA for the Ag Committee.
Judy Seeberger, Senator for District 41. My cities include Grant, Lake Elmo, Afton, the Lakeland cities, Cottage Grove, Hastings, and the townships of West Lakeland Township, Baytown Township, and Nininger Township.
Senator Bruce Anderson, represent most of Wright County. I have a little smidgen of Hennepin County and Rockford City, and then they, with the redistricting, picked up Meeker County, Kingston, and Kingston Township. So. Been there for a few years.
And Janjor Rui, I'm a legislative assistant for Senator Westrom.
Folks, what do you got? Come out and say hi, please. Yeah, use the mic, if you please.
Hello, my name's Olivia, and I'm one of the committee pages.
My name is Michael, also one of the committee pages.
My name is Sunny, also one of the committee pages.
Hello, I'm Sigrid Jewett. I am one of Senator Putnam's interns.
Hi, I'm Laura Robnett. I'm also one of Senator Putnam's interns.
Sorry, not trying to make an entrance here, just happened to be that way. I'm Heather Gustafson. I represent SD 36. It's 9 cities, but the biggest ones are Vadnais Heights, White Bear Lake, and Lino Lakes. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Amanda Peterson, and I cover agriculture for the Senate DFL caucus.
So that is your Ag Committee for the next 4 months. With one notable exception, we are suffering a deficit of CUPEC. but he will be here at some point. And one other sort of procedural thing I should have mentioned, I apologize for not being explicit about this. Obviously, in our responsibility sharing agreement, Senator Westrom and I are co-chairs of the committee this session. The way that we've structured this is today's me. Monday will be a day on veterans, so that will again be me. And then the subsequent 2 sessions will be chaired by Senator Westrom, just so that everybody knows where we're at and what we're doing. So now to our first official order of business, a program update from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Come on down, friends. Folks, we could please state your full names for the record and commence your testimony when you're ready.
All right. Mr. Chair, members, my name is Tom Peterson, and I serve as the Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Vobel. I serve as the Deputy Commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture.
And appreciate the opportunity to just walk through some of the issues that were submitted to us and just kind of a general overview of agriculture. So I'm just going to jump right in and kind of go through some stuff. And again, just a quick refresher about agriculture in Minnesota, I think is always helpful. You're all very familiar from last year and everything, but I always think it's helpful to just like as we look at discussion, just reminding Minnesota a population of 5.7 million people, that we have 65,300 farms. And remembering what makes you a farmer in Minnesota is $1,000 worth of gross income. So I sold a load of hay, 2 goats, and a horse last year. That really puts it in. But I say that in jest, but when you really look at how many farmers we have, and then you look a little bit down, you look at the billions of dollars in crops and livestock and the jobs that we have, as well as the exports and what it drives in our economy that comes from those 65,000 farms. So very important. And one other piece I always put on this, which I think is really important, and Minnesota balances well between livestock and crops, is our 2023 numbers. We'll have 2024 soon, but most years that's much closer, but we do have either crops or livestock to support us. And then just a reminder, too, of where we rank in a lot of the top commodities that are the top producing commodities, of course, in our state. Senator Kupek's not here, but sugar beets, Senator Westrom has some of those in his area. But hogs, too, another big issue, as well as turkeys. We'll talk a little bit more about that later with some of the challenges we're seeing there. But then the big value, dollar-wise, corn, soybeans. Dairy's one where we've slipped some over the years. We've lost farms, but we maintain the number of dairy cows in our state. One you don't see on there as much as, we do have number 8 in livestock production, but we're continuing to build in beef cows. And then I always think it's kind of interesting, too, we're trying to highlight more of some of our locally sourced and produced farms in Minnesota. So we always have our locally Minnesota grown directory, and all of you that have districts and everything, you can search that, or you can find, and your constituents can connect locally with over 1,300 farms in your area. 120 CSAs in Minnesota where they deliver a produce or meat right to your house. And then 375 farmers markets. And that's really been growing in our state in the last few years, which is really a good piece. Senator Putnam was at our organic conference last week in Minnesota. We had a really good turnout of farms. And I always think a question we get, we don't highlight enough, is that we do have 600 certified organic farms in the state. We have many more organic farms, but certified, that's what we have. So an important piece of agriculture and a good opportunity. Next. Is our mission for the department. I'm not going to read it, but that is our mission. Okay, next. And so some of the things we wanted to highlight today, too, we have 508 employees, and you're probably familiar with the different things we do. We promote local farm products at the local state level, respond to diseases, something we'll get into a little bit more. We inspect grocery stores, convenience stores, as well as dairy farms, and regulate feed mills, fertilizer plants. The 508 employees that also mentioned that some of those are seasonal, whether they're helping with potato grading or spongy moth inspection, things like that too as well. And we have different main areas of responsibility of a state agency. Is protecting our food supply is something that's very important, and really proud of the work that we do in that. That is incredibly important. And then we're the primary agency, which is a little different than other state agencies, where we are responsible for promoting our state's ag industry. I always say I'm kind of like don't have to. I love being a chief cheerleader for all of our different parts of agriculture in Minnesota. We have main divisions that we carry out our main programs with, that you can see there on the right. Our ag marketing, which kind of speaks for itself, our dairy meat inspection, our food and feed safety, our laboratory services, pesticide fertilizer management, plant protection, which that can cover everything from wolves and elk to Christmas trees and landscaping and all kinds of things like that. And then our Rural Finance Authority. And we have many of our finer division leaders here today that can answer questions, and you'll see them at committees. I encourage our staff to come and be present in the hearings so that they can be available to you and you can get to know them and they can hear firsthand some of the things that are major issues. Here, looking at our budget, our, I always say, what is the Department of Ag's budget? When you look at the overall state budget, we always say, less than 0.5% of the state's budget, or you look at those and those numbers, $396 million for the current biennium that we're in. You can see the major part of our dollars comes from the general fund, but a good part of it does come from fee-based programs in the ag fund. And then we also are very aggressive, always trying to get federal funds. And then legacy funds are very important as we look at our budget that we'll be, talking about later. We get some really good important pieces in there for that as well. Next slide. And then here's kind of the breakout by division. When you look at that $396 million, that about 51% of that is in protection services, 14% is admin, and then 35% is promotion. That hasn't changed a lot in recent years and everything, but that kind of breaks that out. And then I'm going to get into some programs. We're going to split this up a little bit because Deputy Vobble talks faster than I do, and we got a lot to get through here. So one of the ones we're very excited about, and we get a lot of questions about, is our Farm to School program. And we want to just update you on some of the numbers. So starting in 24, you can see we awarded $930, almost $1 million, for $2 million almost in requests, 62 grants for school purchases, food purchases. You can read that, 17 equipment grants. And then also we added the early care centers, which are eligible for funding. And so that's really exciting. You can see that too in the grants available for 2025. Again, 73 grant applications are so really good to see that. First year we've had the family care child providers. We're eligible for funding. I always love our staff comes up with great names. We call it the local TOTS cost share. And so that's been a really exciting thing. One thing I'd just say in the farm to school programs, or maybe two things that I've seen in my time doing this, is that this is really about helping establish those connections between the producer and the school. Once they get that connection, they know it's like, oh, I didn't think I could do that, or it could be affordable. Then they don't necessarily need government help, but there's just making that connection is incredibly important. And then I'm also really glad to see protein purchases. We've always had apples, lettuce, squash, things like that, but we're starting to see more beef. I'm trying to think what school I was at this year where they, the farmer sells 1 cow a month, goes to the locker, goes to the school. And that's kind of a neat program and everything. So all done with the funding there. Here's a little more on the, one thing that I think is going to be really interesting is federal funds. And so just getting into this real quick, our state, we have a potential to bring $13 million for the Local Foods for Schools program to the state in this next biennium. And we'll kind of know this. We signed a contract with the USDA about a week ago, and we're going to see how this kind of plays out in this time. But $13 million would be incredibly impactful for our schools. We had a similar program about 2 years ago that we had that was also really helpful. As I said, we signed the cooperative agreement. We have to submit a plan by April 30th. We'll kind of know more as we get closer to setting our budget at the end of the time. and we'll have a 3-year timeline to spend these funds. One piece of that, though, is there's no admin for that, and so we'll want to discuss that with the committee as we go forward. I'll turn it over to Deputy Vobble.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And since we gained Kupek, I didn't know if you wanted to let him introduce himself. I didn't want to. Okay, all right. That's cool with me.
Well, thank you. I am sorry I'm a little late. I had constituents, and when constituents make the 4-hour drive down, you give them a little bit of love. So thanks for them. Yes, Senator Rob Kupek. I represent Senate District 4, which is Moorhead over to Detroit Lakes. Sugar beets are a love of mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Senator Kupek. Yeah, so you might have heard about something called Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SAF. It's kind of a hot topic right now. So we are in charge of implementing the tax credit that was passed in 2023. So what is the tax credit? It's $1.50 per gallon tax credit for SAF produced or blended in the state between July 1st of last year and June 30th of 2030. It can be stacked on top of other federal Inflation Reduction Act or IRA tax credits to give us a competitive advantage. We like to say this is a nation-leading tax credit. We do have a total of $11.6 million appropriated for fiscal year 25 through 27 for this tax credit. We anticipate an additional investment through the governor's budget proposal as well, if you've had a chance to look at that. And why is that important? Wide-scale production and use of low-carbon jet fuel is key to decarbonizing aviation, which is one of the most difficult industries to decarbonize, particularly in our greenhouse gas emissions report, which you'll see shortly. And Minnesota-made SAF will bolster rural economies and provide additional revenue streams for farmers. So on that front, in terms of updates, we've been working closely with our sister agency, the Minnesota Department of Revenue, to develop an allocation certificate, application form, and guidance document. So we will be doing all the certification of those looking to get the SAF credit, and then work with Revenue to make sure that they get it. You might have also heard about the Minnesota SAF Hub partnership that Greater MSP launched. They have a ton of really heavy hitters in the SAF Hub coalition, along with Delta, Bank of America. We just noticed Airbus joined the coalition as well. And that is to help create the supply chain to grow feedstocks here in Minnesota and produce SAF on the large scale that we know we need to meet demand. SAF was made from Minnesota-grown camelina here in Minnesota. So I'm sorry, the camelina was grown here, and it was used in a Delta flight from MSP to New York City for Climate Week last September, which is really exciting, first of its kind. And then the U.S. Department of Energy did just recently award $10 million to Forever Green at the University of Minnesota to advance the production of low-carbon crops that can be made into SAF. So a lot of opportunities for all sorts of crops that we grow in Minnesota. And the state's first SAF blending facility is scheduled to come online in late 2025 and will deliver SAF to MSP. It is in Senator Kupek's district, DG Fuels. We're really excited about their investment here in the state. So again, we like to be the best. So passage of the tax credit in 2023 was a historic state investment. So there are a couple other things that we'll be looking to add or alter slightly in this session related to the SAF tax credit. We are proposing a supplemental tax credit rate for SAF with carbon intensity reduction beyond 50%. So in order to meet the definition of SAF, there has to be a 50% reduction from conventional jet fuel. But if folks are able to meet a lower carbon intensity score, we wanted to offer a supplemental tax credit to that. And then, of course, as I mentioned, increased tax credit funding to support the transition. Our Green Fertilizer Grant Program that supports ag and rural electric cooperatives registered as 308A or 308B with the state, so they can invest in green fertilizer manufacturing. They have significant climate and sustainability benefits compared to fossil fuel-derived nitrogen-based fertilizers. We did recently open the RFP for that, so applications are open now through March 18th. And we may award, depending on what we get, between $250,000 and $6.665 million for business-ready and shovel-ready projects. And there's $7 million in available funding for that. Another new grant that we had is our Community Development Financial Institution, or CDFI, Technical Assistance Grants. That was a one-time funding appropriation of $275,000 to support CDFIs to expand financial services to farmers. So the applicant pool for this is a little smaller than usual, just because there are only 33 certified CDFIs in Minnesota. But we did open it up to CDFIs last summer, and we received 3 eligible applications. The nice thing about having a smaller pool of applicants is we did, our team, and some of them are here today, did significant outreach to make sure that these CDFIs were aware of this opportunity. The proposals requested nearly $590,000, so more than 2 times what we had available, and award contracts are underway. We can't name who received those applications just because we're not done with the contracts yet, but we're eager to share those once those are complete. Our Beginning Farmer Equipment and Infrastructure Grant, this one we're really excited about. We just started, this was the first time we've ever done this as well. It was $800,000 that you all appropriated to support new farmers to access equipment and develop infrastructure that will be crucial to the future of their farm businesses. So there were some updates to the program language in 2024 for priority applicants. We offered up to $5,000 for a mini grant or up to $20,000 for the full grant. Applications opened last fall, and we received, I think, a record-breaking 1,100 eligible applications for $16.8 million, so more than 20 times the money that was available. We did have applications from 85 counties. And we are looking at all of those applications right now and working on decisions and communication to applicants. I will say, as we've always said, with new grant programs, we're always learning and continuously improving. So I think there's a lot that we've learned from this process, and would be open to thoughts from committee members about how to make this a better and more useful program, but we're really excited about the energy and excitement in terms of the applications that came in for this grant program. We also received an urban farm conservation mini grant. Speaking of federal funds, we got $200,000, and that was funding from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, otherwise known as NRCS, to support commercial urban farmers in Minnesota to implement conservation-focused urban farm improvements. And so farmers can request up to $5,000, and we've got $75,000 in the first round. Those opened November 2024 last year and are due later this month. Our down payment assistance program, also a relatively new program as well. Just an overview of the program. It's $15,000 for first-time farm buyers. We've got 71 awards in the first 2 rounds, January 2023 through June of last year. The first 2 rounds funded a little over $1 million in down payment assistance, and the third round was funded for fiscal year 25 is for $1 million as well. There are some eligibility requirements, but it's a very widely popular program, one that we're also learning about each year as we do each round. But just exciting to know that 71 folks are farming land that weren't just a couple of years ago.
Okay, next I'm going to jump into the soil health equipment grant, another very popular grant that we've had. Really this grant really came from a lot of the organizations in really looking at soil health. And so, as we looked at getting into and making transitions into whether it's cover cropping or no-till, and so this was a program is unique because we've always had loan programs, but to have a cost share program, I think was really important. And I can just tell you firsthand, this program, by the calls I got, people would say, I'm really thinking about changing my practices, and I think I'm going to apply for that grant program, and so I really could see firsthand that, and it really showed up. The awards could be anywhere from $50,000 to $45,000, and this does have a 50% cost share, and you can see it's to individuals, producer groups, and tribal governments as well. And then really key to the committee on this is $2.375 million. $625,000 was from the committee and the general fund, and then we have $1.75 million in the Clean Water Fund. And you'll see in our Clean Water recs, there'll be dollars for that too as well in our state budget. We also had in fiscal year 25 this year, we have a one-time addition for funds in the 8 southeast counties to work on addressing nitrate issues was what the legislature decided last year. And here's just a little more information. 23, we called it a pilot program where we had 16 awards, but you could tell when we had 238 applicants and we could do 16 grants. But we were able to do a little better than the last year's thanks to the funding from the legislature to do the 81 and 90 awards. But you can see the amounts requested there and the amounts awarded. That really a popular program, and so I'll get a lot of appreciation for that. And I really see it being transformational. And then I also want to just update people, speaking of Southeast Minnesota, as you recall, we had a petition on 8 Southeast counties you know, the department's been working on nitrate reduction through a lot of different areas for many years. And so what the committees worked on last year was providing us $2.8 million to start providing mitigation for private wells contaminated in those areas. And so the update is that we have installed 126 reverse osmosis systems as of January 16th, and we also have another 173 residents have turned in their applications. So we estimate we'll be able to do somewhere between 500 and 1,000 systems, depending on identified need and demand. So that work is ongoing. And then another one the committee did, I think it was Senator Dornick's bill last year, was $225,000 to do another round of secondary school technical and educations for meat processing, meat cutting, butchery. Really a great program. You know, legislature's also helped the colleges. We hadn't had a meat cutting class, remember, I think since Pipestone closed in the 90s. And then a couple of years ago, the legislature helped reestablish programs at Staples and Ridgewater. And now it's nice to have, and then a couple of years ago, we did this first round, and we were able to do, as you can see on the bottom, in fiscal year 23, 16 schools. And maybe some of you have been out there. That Center Western might be in your district, like to Ashby or West Central, the Swatskis. They have a great trailer, you know, there, and all the neat stuff that they do. But, you know, it's really, you know, maybe even helped create a feeder system into our colleges and really help address. And remember, too, when we're talking about butchering and meat processing, the issue a lot of times during COVID that we had was that a lot of these places, we had dollars to do, CARES dollars, things like that. We couldn't get it out because people would say, I can't expand because I don't have any workers, you know. And the average age of a locker owner we found is older than the average age of a farmer, you know, and so really trying to build that next generation, and so this is a really key part of that. So that is the update on that.
So speaking of meat, so we do, as part of our agency work, is our meat inspection program. So as Tom mentioned, meat and poultry processing growth continues to grow. We did see demand from COVID to really drive new slaughter and processing capacity. A lot of investment was made at the federal level in that way. We did do the school meat processing grants, so certainly seeing a lot of successful starts in those schools. So in terms of inspection program resources, you all kindly allocated some dollars for us to have a meat processing liaison, and it's an outreach position. It's been significantly a positive impact for us in our meat inspection program for folks who are looking to get into meat processing or looking to navigate the process. Megan is her name, and she does fantastic work, so thank you for that. It's been certainly had an impact. Staffing levels in that program are adequate as of now, but we do have a few gaps, particularly in the veterinary space. We do have our Equal To program that's funded by the USDA. The language is up to 50%. So normally they provide the full 50% match. You'll see the normal funding sources at the top with the 50-50. But the federal match we're seeing significant shortfalls over this year and then into the next. So that is a hindrance to our staff funding as well as laboratory testing abilities. So we are starting to reduce some staff to ensure that we stay within those budgets, but certainly something that we're concerned about into the future. So as I mentioned, there are continued reductions with severe impact on the program overall. So for our federal fiscal year 24, USDA provided $2 million in match dollars. That's 19% short of the full 50%. So we did try and get creative and use general funds to supplement, and we shifted staff to other places and held positions open, as I mentioned, particularly for veterinary and compliance positions. But we know that USDA is projected to provide even less than the $2 million in fiscal year 25. So there, again, would be significant impacts that would start even earlier than we anticipated. This might mean that we'll have to reduce or eliminate some important food safety activities, things like testing for listeria, as we cannot support the laboratory costs. Some of the positivity that comes out of testing for those things, listeria, things like the boar's head outbreak you might have heard about that came from our lab and the testing that we did there, but it is not a mandatory piece of the program, which is why that would be something we'd have to to reduce or eliminate if funding goes away. As mentioned, we won't be able to support as many of the mandated inspection frequencies. We also talk about, if we can't get meat inspectors there, then they can't have slaughter. So that also affects meat processing plants significantly. So something we're worried about, something we're watching, something we're working on with the federal government, but also something we just want you to be aware of and have some insight into. Some other federal funding concerns. So our food safety program, we have significant funding. As you saw, 10% of our whole budget comes from federal funding. There are some planned FDA reductions to state and local programming funding due to budgetary constraints. We've already absorbed quite a bit of those funding reductions since 2019. So we've had a total annual revenue reduction totaling nearly $1 million. As you know, we've heard a lot about inflation. When combined with inflation and our operational expense increases, we are predicting a funding shortage about $2.5 million in fiscal year 26. So, of course, further reductions in federal funding will have a result in personnel reductions, and certainly that will have an impact on food safety and the industry as a whole in Minnesota. We are working very hard on this one. We've been pretty loud on this with Senator Tina Smith. She's brought it up in committee on the federal level, so we'll continue to raise the alarm, but also something we all wanted you to be aware of. As well with some other federal funding concerns, we face a 20% cut for our spongy moth management program from USDA APHIS as the pest continues to advance more and more into the state. There's also some cuts to invasive species monitoring, which has been flat for about 20 years and probably will decrease from there. And it just limits our ability to detect and manage the many new threats that we're seeing come online every day. Another piece we'll be talking more about with the committee is our food licensing modernization work. So we've talked about this the last few years in this committee about our outdated licensing structure and the fee schedule. So the current structure that's built there right now is based in the 1970s landscape of singular business types. So we're seeing the business landscape change significantly over the last several years. There's also been an inflationary impact, of course, since 2003, which is quite substantial since we did update the fee structure or the fee schedule. And we did talk significantly and with and extensively with groups of businesses and users of our licensing system to understand what changes would be needed and how we could make this an easier process for all of them all around. So some of the desired outcomes we have for this proposal is a simplified licensing structure that's adaptive to modern food business models. We see a lot of folks who kind of dally in a lot of different things, not just one. And so we want to be able to be responsive and nimble to that. We want to correlate the system to food safety risk and corresponding assessment needs, so high, medium, low risk. And then, again, provide flexibility for licensees that are allowing for the evolution and the evolution of new and small operations that are coming online. You'll also see we had a cooperative financial report that made its way to you. Last year, the legislature required us to convene a cooperative financial work group and develop recommendations relating to requirements for cooperatives to report on their financial conditions. We conducted 2 virtual meetings, one with producers and members and one with cooperative managers and staff. You can see in the report we did not recommend additional requirements for cooperatives to report on financial conditions due to existing statutes and the democratic principles of cooperatives, but you'll see more in terms of some suggestions we have related to cooperatives in that report.
Okay. And then we just want to talk about H5N1 or avian influenza really quick. Obviously people always say, what keeps you up at night? This continues to wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, is continued detections of hypath in poultry, and it does continue. Dr. Hayes with the board, he's going to go more into depth in this, but I want to talk about what the department of, besides working cooperatively with the board, who's the lead agency on the outbreak, our responsibility has to do with the milk in dairy cows. And so we're rolling out, we are now enrolled in the USDA's, it's a mandatory national milk testing strategy. The strategy facilitates comprehensive H5N1 surveillance of the nation's milk supply in dairy herds. And there's a 5-stage roadmap. We're looking to begin this sometime in the first week or so of February, working with existing farms. We'll have stages that they are set where we can move around. We're going to actually start at stage 2, where we'll be testing at the bulk tank. We've been working very closely. We do have a webinar coming up that you all should get an invitation to if you'd like to learn more about this. I think it's Friday. And we've tried to engage with our dairy stakeholders quite a bit to work through this too as well. And so the USDA will be signing a cooperative agreement with them on this coming up too as well. I really want to highlight why this is important from an agricultural standpoint is when you look at, and Dr. Haefs will go through some of the cases that we have in poultry, but if you look at the virus that we have right now, this summer we did have some cases within dairy farms. I think we had 9 cases total on dairy farms, and those do have crossover effect into poultry. If you look at what's going on right now in California, and my personal opinion is they've had, again, we had it on 9 farms this summer, that strain. The strain in California right now is in 700 of their dairy farms. They have 900 dairy farms, so almost 3/4 of their dairy farms. But if you look at what would happen if that were to happen in Minnesota, we have 1,700 dairy farms, and you look at where our dairy farms are located, and you overlay them. If you look on the right, I had to look because it's kind of small. The red is poultry, I believe, and the purple is dairy. Okay, thank you, Andrea. And but you look at that, and you look at just the concern, as we have. And so our producers, our organizations, they're working very hard on biosecurity. We're trying to get the message out, that this is a big issue if we can keep this. California is actually using our labs right now because they're overwhelmed with what they're seeing there. And so you've probably seen that where Governor Newsom had to declare a state of emergency over this before he had to declare another state of emergency over fires. But again, a very serious situation that we need to work on to address as well. And in doing that, one of the things that you've been very, working with Senator Westrom back when he was chair and continuing with Chair Putnam was giving us financial support so that I can sleep at night over this, as we at one time had $4 million in our ag emergency account to address this. Because again, we've been dealing with this since 2022. We also have been looking at African swine fever, foot and mouth disease, all these other things we could deal with at any moment too. But as we look at that, you can see where our fund balance is right now. It's actually, and what we spend it on as we have cases, whether we have outbreaks, we help farmers go through that depopulation. We work with all kinds of different things. We buy supplies so that we have them on hand. We help other states that maybe don't have as much experience. If you look at the starred numbers, we sign a cooperative agreement with the USDA, and then they'll reimburse us for that. But because we have an account, we have money, we can go forward and we can put dollars, so we'll be reimbursed for some of those portions of that. I also mentioned in our baseline, we also have I think it's $250,000 that helps pay for our staff and other things, and that continues on too as well. So appreciate being able to have that discussion as we go forward. And with that, I just want to thank the committee. There's a few other things I get questions about that we didn't put in that. One is wolf and elk depredation. We're currently out of money to pay farmers because we've had so many claims. So any farmers that have claims, I was in northern Minnesota yesterday, they're going to have to wait till the end of the fiscal year, which is July 1st, before we can start making payments again. And a head of farmer asked me about that yesterday, so we've seen an uptick in both of those. We also had a deer report a lot of people have asked about, and that'll be ready 1st of February for the committee. Finally, I want to take a moment, Mr. Chair, if I could, to just I think there's been a lot of questions. The Department of Ag handles a lot of dollars. We do a lot of grants, probably thousands of grants a year. And, we've always taken that very seriously. We had a audit I encourage you to look at this year with the legislative audit that our staff worked closely with on biofuels and bio-incentive report. And I think they looked at the controls that our agency puts in place and the fiscal management that our agency puts forward. And the internal controls and the risk assessments that we have, the people that we have in place. We have a grant compliance coordinator, a grant coordinator that works and makes sure that those positions and things are followed. So we're glad to have a conversation about any of that too, if that's helpful. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson and Deputy Commissioner Vauvel. Members, what do you want to talk about? Questions? Senator Westrom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Peterson, just on the last topic you were talking about with avian influenza in the dairy cattle, did I understand you right? Did you say 700 of the 900 herds in California have found strains in their milk? Is that what
Commissioner Peterson?
we're talking about?
Well, this is weird. Chair Putnam, Chair Westrom.
Yeah.
We're all
That's
friends
a first
here.
for me. Hope I did that right. You got correct. 700 of their farms have tested positive for the virus, and so that's a concern. And keep in mind in dairy, and Dr. Hayes would be a better one to ask about this. For when we see they lose milk production, it's not necessarily fatal. It can be fatal if they have other comorbidities or things like that, but it is fatal then to neighboring poultry farms or things like that. But you do have a drop in milk production. That's not helpful or good either. And and I think that we've seen other states. Colorado has 100 dairies, and I think 70 of their dairy farms had it this summer. They did a robust testing program, and to me, they tested out of it. And I think that's really important. So I think that working through this is important. I also want to remind the public too that, properly cooking meat, kills the virus, and pasteurizing milk kills the virus. And so that's the other piece. If you become positive or we find that you have it, you can still ship your milk. You have to test it, but as long as it's going to pasteurization, that's okay.
And Mr. Chair, you anticipated my second question, Commissioner, but that's my understanding, is it's not that it's dumped, it's just informational at this point. There's certainly other, acceptable levels of bacteria in all food and products, and hence, the reason milk largely is pasteurized is because of some of those concerns in shelf life and things like that. So is that kind of the process we would see here in Minnesota too? And is there any other concerns for the dairy farmers market-wise, other than it's kind of like, I grew up on a dairy farm. Cattle sometimes had the flu or fevers, and you could just tell that they were sick from something, and they didn't produce like they normally would, so you could tell that as a producer, your cattle. But that's, I'm guessing, the same symptoms we're dealing with here, and to the extent you want to comment on that, that'd be helpful, and then the Board of Animal Health, we can certainly get some more information on.
Commissioner Peterson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Mr. Chair, I think that Dr. Hayes would be better to kind of break that down for you, but that's the general plan. The other thing that we work really hard on as Commissioner, the USDA does have programs to help those farmers, even with the milk loss, that they can sign up for. My personal opinion is the farmers have been a little leery to sign up for those programs. They do have that. One other thing I want to mention, the Department of Health is a very important partner in this too as well. The workers are incredibly important to all those farms, and the farmers that work on them. They offer free PPE to that, and to my knowledge, Minnesota has the highest uptake of farms getting PPE, whether that's, you probably heard where, conjunctivitis is one of the cases that you get it. So whether it's goggles, and goggles aren't something I don't want to wear on the farm all the time, but like masks and gloves and everything. And so that's another important piece. So there are resources for farmers, and we do have those on our website, and the board has those too as well.
Senator Westrom. Members, other questions, curiosities? Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned, Mr. Peterson, earlier on the different places where our products are listed as number 1 through number 9. How about egg production in the state of Minnesota? Do we have a good handle on how we're doing with egg production?
Commissioner Peterson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Anderson, we don't have a lot of egg production in the state. We do have some, and it's really important. We unfortunately had a fire this last week in your area. But the egg, production that we have kind of large scale entities in the state, and then we have a pretty robust small scale or a farmer's market type egg production in our state. So we kind of have the both, but we don't rank in the top in that, and something we're, continue to look and try to partner on, but it's not one that we're in the top 10 on.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Anderson.
And getting back to where you have an emergency fund for testing and all that, is there enough funding to go forward to the end of this fiscal year for doing all the tests that need to be done?
Commissioner Peterson.
Mr. Chair and Senator Anderson, that's something TBA, as we kind of see like what happens. If you think about 2022, hope I get my years right here, when we had the outbreak, it actually started during the legislative session. I remember the day, it was March 26th. I had to come down on a Saturday. I was sitting on the couch, and I remember it very clearly. We had two outbreaks. We had one in a backyard and one in a backyard to me is not the greatest term either. It's a smaller farmer operation and then a large-scale commercial operation. And in that spring, we had a lot of cases. I think we had almost 100. We, continue to work to build up that fund. We went through the year 23. 24, we had, I think, 2 cases, or 23, excuse me. And, but then in the fall, it really came back hard. We got, 40 some cases in the fall. And then, and keep in mind then too, it was in wild birds too, and we were seeing it. So we were able to kind of use that fund where we were like, we had 100 cases in the, in the spring, the one year, and then we only had 2, and so then this last year we had more. So we really don't know. It really depends on the migration, the way the virus moves around. I think you're going to hear from Dr. Hafes that the virus is not going away. I don't want to steal his thunder, sorry. But, that's something that we're prepared for, and we have to be prepared to, so right now we feel pretty comfortable, but yeah, so, and I appreciate that. And we look at other things. Can we use state emergency dollars? I don't know if you remember this, but during COVID, we ended up in a situation where we were backing up 30,000 hogs a day and almost 100,000 turkeys a day because we have a just-in-time system. And we had to go to the special accounts and I forget what it was called. It was like a tribunal of legislators to get the federal COVID dollars available so that we could depopulate a lot of these animals. And so we unfortunately have experience with this, and we kind of have an idea what it's going to cost. We've also been able to, to me, instill some cost-saving measures because we've gotten, unfortunately, better at this, too. I think our emergency manager, and she's here, by the way, Lucy Hunt, she does a good job, whether that's buying supplies, maintaining supplies. We have our own, whether it's foamers or we have semi-trailers, we have things that we own, and so we're unfortunately well prepared to handle this. We just don't know what the virus is going to bring.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Senator Dornick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Peterson, it's always nice to see you. Get back to work here. Appreciate your work. So I want to talk about or ask a question about the Minnesota water treatment there in southeastern Minnesota. You have some numbers here. Do you know what the balance is now? You got 126 that have been installed. Kind of what the cost per house is. I know there's a variance there because you have estimated 500 to 1,000. So just kind of any details on that. Otherwise, you can just send them to me later too if they don't have that information available. Commissioner.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Senator Dornick, we actually just kind of asked for that actually ourselves because I'm a little shaky on the numbers because I don't quite remember, but Mr. Stamper maybe can address that real quick.
Mr. Chair, Senator, right now to install one of these reverse osmosis systems, it's depending on the vendor, it's between $1,200 and $800. Currently, we've installed about 126 of these. Realistically, the limiting factor in us being able to get these in is engaging folks through local units of government to test their water systems to make sure that they have clean, safe drinking water. At this point in time, we are not limited on funds. I don't have that number right off the top of my head, but we can provide you an overview.
Sorry for the interruption quickly, but could you state your name and position for the record first, just for the record purposes?
My apologies, Senator Putnam. My name is Joshua Stamper. I'm the Division Director of the Pesticide and Fertilizer Management Division.
Members, Senator Kunish.
Just one quick last one. On your food licensing modernization, and it says that need to change licensing structures and fees, especially adaptive to modern food business models. I think you know, I'm probably going to ask about food trucks. Is this part of the licensing? Because, you know, I have a daughter who has a food truck, and there have been groups that have reached out to us to talk about the clumsy structure of licensing, not the state, but across the board. And I'm wondering if this would include food trucks. I know before COVID hit, there was sort of a group that was looking at all of this, and that got interrupted. And I'm wondering if it would be a good idea to bring that back.
Mr. Chair, Senator Kunish, I am going to have our division director come up just to specify, but it's a good question and been a big part of the conversation. It's a very good example of why we need to be a little bit more responsive to the business models that are coming up since the 1970s. I know we also work very closely with the Department of Health, who has certain jurisdiction over food trucks as well. So, but I will let Catherine speak to that specifically.
Please state your name for the record and then commence your testimony.
Hello, my name is Catherine Simon. I'm the Director of the Food and Feed Safety Division for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And Chair and member, the answer to the question is our proposal is limited to only those licenses that are within our authority. It does address mobiles within that context. We do participate in the work group. So the work group is up and running again. That is looking at mobiles across the states. That would include work with the Department of Health as well as our delegated agencies, both those delegated under Department of Agriculture authority as well as Department of Health authority. And that work group is up and running again. And so we are actively participating in that as well.
Senator Kunish.
Thank you so much. That's good to know. And I can let the, so there is a group of food truck owners that are, you know, pinging me every so often, and I can let them know that. And then if you would like to speak with those folks at all and bring them into the conversation, I'd be happy to facilitate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Members, other questions or comments? Senator Westrom.
Chair, Commissioner, you talked about the wolf deprivation funds, the wolf and elk deprivation. When did they run out, and was it more demand on the wolf side or the elk side?
Commissioner Peterson?
Give us that information.
Mr. Chair, this is kind of fun, but we ran out just before the first of the year, and we've seen a big input in uptake in elk damage and wolf, both. And, you know, you gave us the ability years ago to move the dollars between those funds, and so that's always been helpful in the past years, because in past years, maybe the elk fund didn't have as much claims or the wolf did, and we were able to balance it out, but it doesn't work so good when they both have a lot of claims. And so that's been a big issue we've been working on, and so we'll continue to look at that. One other factor in that is federal funds. Sometimes we're able to get some federal dollars, and we weren't able to this year, but we'll continue to work on that too as well. Sometimes that can backfill that too as well. But yeah, we're out, you know, and I was, like I said, I was in Floodwood yesterday, and a farmer asked me, I just submitted a claim, and I said, sorry, you know, you're going to have to wait.
Senator Westrom?
Funny you say you were in Glenwood and they were asking for a claim a week and a half ago, where I was out to the Redhead Creamery in my district and just east of Glenwood. And on the way there, my wife and son who were with me going to the event, there was a party or hunting on the side of the road, and they had wolves that they had apparently successfully shot, and or I think they're a wolf or coyote, I suppose. I think about it because they probably couldn't shoot wolf. But my wife thought it was a wolf. And so I thought, are they this far down? Are you hearing reports like that, Commissioner?
Commissioner Peterson.
Mr. Chair, the wolves do have a big range and it's grown in Minnesota. We also do submit a wolf report to you that we could get to you too, that you can see where those claims are. But not quite as much, little north of your area.
Senator Westrom.
Mr. Chair, one last question, Commissioner Peterson. Last year we had some language just for the department to work with some financial transparency questions and issues, concerns with farmers and co-op members. Do you have any update on any discussions that you've had or any progress the department's made with having any work groups or any meetings to talk with farmers and others on this matter as far as talking about ways to have more transparency, financial transparency for farmers and with their relationships with their co-ops?
Commissioner Vogel?
Mr. Chair, we did have a couple of meetings based on the language that was passed that you referenced. You should have a copy of that, and if not, we can be sure to resend it. So we did hold 2 meetings, one with producers and members and one with managers of co-ops. And you'll see in that report some feedback. We did offer that folks could submit testimony, basically based on the report, so that it was part of the report, so you can see that as well. In terms of recommendations from the department, we didn't see a need for increased financial requirements, just based again on the ones that exist right now, as well as the democratic nature of cooperatives with the members that they vote in. We do, I think, talk about a little bit more about just maybe publicizing to their members and communication with their members about the financial transactions they have and what rights they have as members. But you'll see all of that report, and we're happy to present on that at another point.
Thank you.
Members, other questions? Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Peterson, you had mentioned something about the farmers. I was wondering, because it's been brought up in many times in our Ag Committee, reporting the number of farmers that are in dairy or hogs or beef. What about the deer farmers, the commercial deer farmers that are in the state? How has that been tallied, and what do you see the future of that happening?
Commissioner Peterson.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Anderson, I'd just say that's been challenging in the last few years, as you know, in our state with chronic wasting disease and new regulations put on those farmers. You know, that we've seen a decline in the deer farmers in our state. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going out of farming. It means they're going out of deer farming. So they might put cattle back on that property, or they might go into another type of agriculture. Similar with dairy farmers. When we see dairy farmers go out, they're not necessarily always going out of farming. They're just going out of dairy farming. And so one thing, you know, we had regulations. I think they had to have fencing requirements done by September 1st of last year. We have 101 deer farms. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Vobel, by the way. But that is quite a reduction in our state. Again, they're not necessarily out of farming. They maybe just switched to cattle or something. There are people that have left that business, though. Our department, we did make some dollars available to assist farmers with that fencing too as well. And we did have some good uptake on that too as well. So but definitely seen a decrease in that.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Senator Anderson.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Peterson, so how many grants were given out to the commercial deer farmers?
Commissioner Peterson.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, we could get you that information. We had, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but we could get that to you.
Thank you.
Senator Kunish.
Thank you. Commissioner, is it legal to shoot wolves at this time?
Commissioner Peterson.
Mr. Chair and Senator, it is not.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Thank you very much, Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, for your thorough and candid and efficient presentation. Members, we should note that all of the issues, most of the issues that were addressed in the survey that we just heard before us are likely to come out throughout the course of the session. So this is just a kind of basic primer on where we're at. So now if we could have our friend from the Board of Animal Health with an update on H5N1 and emerging threats. Dr. Haves, if you would please come forward, state your full name for the record, and commence your testimony when you're ready.
My name is Dr. Brian Hafes. I am the state veterinarian for Minnesota and executive director for the Minnesota Board of Animal Health. And thank you for having me today to give you a briefing. That's our mission statement. I'm going to kind of paraphrase it for you. Basically, the role of the Board of Animal Health is to detect, control, and hopefully eradicate disease in domestic animals. So I think a lot of times people assume that we are the Board of Veterinary Medicine. That's not really our role. Our role is to conduct surveillance on those diseases we consider reportable or dangerous in the state. That's just a picture of me, so you can see what I look like when it's warm. I was appointed to this position officially in August of 2023, but I served in the interim role starting in April of 2023, so I'm coming around to my second year in this role. Next slide. Just an overview of our agency. It's a little different than a lot of the agencies you deal with. We are guided by a board of directors appointed by the governor. So this is the 7-member board of directors you had the opportunity to interview last spring. I will say a stacked deck, if you will. We've got great experts in poultry, swine production, swine veterinarians. We've got a couple of individuals that are companion animal veterinarians. One of our veterinarians is also a renowned aquaculturist in the state and nationally. And then we also have a member of the Shakopee Minwakatan Sioux Indian community. Non-emergency priorities. So this really refers to kind of the simmering that's happening at our agency, the diseases that are on our radar. This is not an extensive list. This is kind of what's in the headlines, what you might have heard recently, and I'm probably going to add a couple to these. But just to start out, African swine fever continues to be a concern worldwide. Certainly as the second largest swine producing state in the country, we really worry about an incursion of African swine fever into the U.S. and specifically into Minnesota and what that would do to our swine industry. Currently, we do monitoring for this virus at various intervals. Various states are dictated the number of animals that have to be tested based on their population, and certainly Minnesota and Iowa represent a majority of those states. The bullet there says monitoring sightings on our northern border. That isn't suggesting we have African swine fever in Canada, but it's more referring to feral swine. So the magic combination of African swine fever entering a country is usually feral swine combined with garbage feeding. Fortunately, we claim to not have feral swine in Minnesota. We do a lot of follow-up on loose pig sightings. Typically, they end up being lost or abandoned pets, pot-bellied pigs and others. There has been some debate about what's happening up in Canada. We had a series of discussions about the super pigs. I'm sure you all heard about the super pigs that were threatening to encroach into Minnesota, and they were devastating and uncontrolled. Oddly, we got another report from some other constituents in Canada that said they are not superheroes. They are pigs that are under control, and they think they can eradicate them. So we suspect we lie somewhere in between, but we're not going to rest on our laurels with that. We're still maintaining observation up on the northern border to make sure that we don't have anything fading over. Rabies. We've had a tremendous year of rabies in Minnesota in 2024. Probably attributed to the warm winter we had. A lot of the rabies cases are attributed to skunks and bats in Minnesota. So species that typically will hibernate to some extent, they didn't have to. And they survived and were able to infect a variety of species. including a herd of cattle, which was an interesting case. We ended up with 3 detections confirmed, probably 4. Actually, another animal had died that wasn't tested, but likely related to skunk entering the barnyard. Tularemia is the next disease listed up there. That's a record for last year as well, 27 cases. This is a disease of concern because it's zoonotic. So this disease will affect humans as well as animals. Traditionally, it's spread by rabbits. It's kind of considered a disease of rabbits. And then, of course, cats or dogs that might feed on those rabbits that are infected get infected and contract the disease. Similarly, people who end up doing a lot of rabbit hunting and cleaning their rabbits sometimes succumb to this, I should say succumb, become infected with tularemia as well. So it's of concern because these cases have all been in the metro area between Hennepin and Ramsey County. Kennel investigations are on an uptick in Minnesota as well. A lot of attention on what's happening in our kennel and breeder communities, and trying to determine where our authority lies has been something to navigate. We are fortunate to have recently hired a new staff attorney that is very very good at doing research and determining opportunities that we have to exert a little more authority where it's probably been lacking in the past. Farm cervids, we are down in farm cervid numbers. The question was about white-tailed deer. We don't manage white-tailed deer anymore. As you know, that's been transferred to the DNR with the exception of mixed herds. So there are a handful, I think there's 13 herds that are mixed white-tailed deer and other cervids that we oversee with the DNR. Aside from that, we are at about 60 non-white-tail cervid herds. Happy to say no CWD detection since August 2022. And then, you know, as I said, this is not an exhaustive list. We certainly deal with things like canine influenza as the summer months come around, canine brucellosis, some diseases of our companion animals that show up a lot of times with import of animals for shelters, rescue groups, that sort of thing. Commissioner Peterson talked about those things that keep them up at night. Aside from Dr. Peterson texting me at night and keeping me up, I hear about the latest and greatest encroaching on our borders or with our ally countries. So currently, New World screwworm has shown up in Mexico. This is a parasite that we eradicated from the United States back in the 60s, I believe, and pushed it as far south as Central America. Due to some import smuggling, I guess is what they're calling it, into Mexico. The southern border of Mexico is seeing an uptick in this parasite. It's a concern. It's a fly that spreads this larva. This larva is a little different than your normal maggot. It actually eats live tissue versus what we're used to seeing in maggots in this climate. So I don't know that this particular insect is going to survive in northern climates, but if we get a load of cattle that would be imported from Mexico or even some of our southern states that had the larva or the eggs laid on these cattle, they would survive through the summer at least. At any rate, it's going to affect commerce and trade with international partners if there is a detection in the United States. A lot of attention is going towards control and eradication of that to make sure it doesn't move any closer to the United States. And then Commissioner Peterson also mentioned foot and mouth disease. So there's one that keeps me awake more than I care to admit. That disease is one that affects multiple species, basically any cloven hoofed animal. So cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, deer can be infected with the disease. Very, very devastating on production. It's not always fatal, but it's very, very infectious. There was a detection very recently in Germany, which is why I say this is a new concern to me, because we have a lot of commerce with Germany. We have a lot of people traveling back and forth with pets to Germany. We have a lot of imports of horses from Germany. So opportunities for new diseases, new infections, parasites to be spread. So now you can all have trouble sleeping at night as well. Next slide. Which brings us to our current emergencies or emergent conditions. So highly pathogenic avian influenza, H5N1 in livestock, kind of the same thing, probably taking up 90% of our time and resources at the board today. And then avian metapneumovirus is another one that I will get to. Next slide, please. Just to distinguish what we're talking about here with, you hear high path avian influenza, H5N1, they're really the same thing. H5N1 is the name of the virus that is spreading highly pathogenic avian influenza. Gets real confusing. I made a decision in Minnesota. We are going to refer to high path or HPAI when we're talking about poultry cases, H5N1 when we're dealing with other species. Next slide, please. So H5N1 in mammals. This is obviously a map of the U.S. and kind of the detections of H5N1 in mammals. And this is, I believe this goes, back to 2022. So the point being made with this is there are a lot of paradomestic species that are infected with this virus that are usually incidental, and you'll see from the map there, it's a little of everything. We've got domestic cats are real susceptible to this, but we see it in foxes, we see it in coyotes, rabbits, skunks are real prone to contracting this. There was even a bear detected with this virus, I think, earlier in 2023. Next slide. So specifically, highly pathogenic avian influenza in poultry. Our most recent detection, I hate to bring this up, it says January 14th, 2025. I regret to inform you, it is now January 21st, 2025. We had a detection in Wadena County earlier this week that ended up in a depopulation of a turkey flock. We continue to do surveillance for this reason. This is kind of supposed to be our downtime with respect to this virus. Typically, the virus is spread by migratory waterfowl, so hopefully the migratory waterfowl have migrated. We certainly have those pockets where they hang around and we still see a case or two, which is basically what's happening, but the real start usually is towards the end of March when those birds start coming back north. The cost to respond in 2024 for our agency was $600,000 based on our salary alone, as opposed to $450,000 in 2023. And then Commissioner Peterson did steal my thunder. This virus is not going away. Incidentally, this is originally was designated a foreign animal disease, which is why our agency was involved in trying to eradicate this. 2015 is when we first saw this virus hit Minnesota and hit hard. It was controlled, and actually last cases, I think it started somewhere February, March of that year and was done by about June and kind of following the migratory pattern. And we did not see that virus then again until 2022. So my point there is it's not going away. We aren't getting that 7-year reprieve that we had hoped. Commissioner Peterson alluded to that. We've been dealing with this basically since 2022. There's been some off and on, but it seems to be more consistent. This virus is not going away. It used to migrate and then we would see it dissipate and not come back. That's not been the case in the last 3 years. Next slide, please. Current picture of avian influenza in Minnesota. Again, I have to up the number from 11 cases to 12. So that's 8 commercial premises and 4 backyard premises. That's basically from November to today. We also were able to declare ourselves free of high-path avian influenza in October of 2024, and then about a month later had our first case come back. So we enjoyed a month of freedom and then a return of the virus. Genomic sequencing is something I'm going to talk quite a bit about. It's kind of a big fancy way of talking about family trees when it refers to these viruses. So think 23andMe and how we do DNA testing to determine how closely people are related. That's become a new strategy in combating this particular virus. And it'll come into play here in our discussion about H5N1 and dairy cattle more specifically. Currently, the strains that we are seeing, the genotypes are the D1.1 and A3. And that's going to be important because those are strains that we know are circulating in the wild migratory waterfowl. Those strains have also not been detected in dairy cattle. And there hasn't been any spillover into dairy cattle with those 2 variants. I will also point out the uptick in human cases, though, which is worth noting. And again, Commissioner Peterson alluded to our friends at Department of Health being very involved in our response. We include them on our response team for this reason. There have been, I think, upwards of 30 plus cases of human detections of the virus. Most of these cases have been in individuals that are working directly with sick animals. So they work on a dairy farm that had the virus, or they're working with depopulation. But there have been a couple of cases with unknown exposure to poultry or dairy that have ended up in critical condition. Canada had a case, and we unfortunately had a fatal case in Louisiana, and it was this D1.1 strain. That individual had some comorbidities and other things going on, but worth noting, this D1.1 strain concerns me more than the previous dairy strain that we were dealing with. Next slide, please. Which brings us to H5N1 in dairy cattle. So the strain that we were talking about there was the B313. This was a unique spillover event. It was identified in Texas originally in, I think it was March of last year. The detection, the sequencing suggests this is a one-time event. So there was one bird that infected one cow, and it flourished from there, spreading across the country. The signs of this disease are kind of, I don't want to call them incidental, but they're signs of sick cows that we're kind of used to in dairy farming. I'm a dairy farm kid, and if I saw a cow with these signs, I would just think, well, we got another case of mastitis, we got a cow off feed, and within a couple weeks she recovers. So it has not been extremely devastating as far as production. There's a drop in production. It seems to flow through the herd, but the real devastation is how this disease spreads to our neighboring poultry flocks. And Commissioner Peterson's map was a great overlay of, you can see the dairy industry and poultry industry are very close in Minnesota. So in Minnesota, we had 9 detections of the H5N1 virus in dairy cattle. We had, I believe it was 18 poultry cases last summer, all related to the same strain, and links to oddly dairy cattle from other states. But we know the virus has moved from multiple states to Minnesota. The industry was reluctant to participate, I will say, in surveillance of this virus. The dairy industry kind of wanted to be left alone. In their defense, this virus didn't affect their species, their commodity that much. They were able to kind of work their way through it and move on. But it was devastating to their poultry neighbors. The main steps in controlling this are biosecurity, kind of the catchphrase for all of these diseases, and then pre-movement testing to prevent moving this to other states. So there was a federal order that required testing of all lactating dairy cattle moving interstate to have a negative H5N1 test within 7 days of movement. And we further imposed that on our exhibitions to make sure that we weren't spreading it amongst exhibitions. I will say this virus, this strain, the B313 strain, has not been seen in Minnesota since July of 2024. Everyone knock on wood with me. That's a great sign, considering we have poultry cases and in dairy country, and they are not testing positive with this strain. Across the country, the only state that is reporting this strain still is California, and California is a hot mess of dairy and poultry industry lumped on top of each other in a very concentrated area. So it's not a surprise. But to their credit, they are doing their due diligence, and the case numbers are dwindling in that state as well. So Commissioner Peterson mentioned the new federal order to do mandatory milk testing in all states. I think we can be not surprised if it comes back that Minnesota does not have this strain of the virus, which would be a great thing. If it does show up in Minnesota, we will approach the disease response similar to how we did this summer. And I think that's our next slide. I get into that. Yeah. So Department of Agriculture is leading the surveillance efforts, kind of non-intrusive surveillance. Since there's already milk samples being tested for other things, they're able to use those samples to just a couple drops to test for the H5N1. If reports come back that those are positive or non-negative, as our labs would call it, they would get referred to the Board of Animal Health, and in partnership with Department of Ag and USDA, we would use our emergency response incident management team to respond to those cases with quarantine of the premises, permitted milk movement. As Commissioner Peterson mentioned, milk is allowed to continue moving. It has to move to a facility that will pasteurize the milk. Pasteurization is very effective at killing this virus. That last bullet point, potential for overlap of poultry and dairy cases during the spring migration. Here's another one that keeps me up at night. So we are going to start this testing in the beginning of February. As I mentioned, the migration starts usually end of February, beginning of March. So we could have a perfect storm of dairy cases and poultry cases dumped in our laps this spring. So somewhat poised, somewhat nervous about that possibility. Again, I'm trying to be milk glass half full and say the virus is not existing in our dairy cattle in Minnesota, and we won't have that issue. But it will cause more staff time to evaluate test results and make sure that we are monitoring that. Next slide. Okay, and the last virus that I wanted to talk about is avian metapneumovirus. So this is kind of the trifecta that we've dealt with this summer. We had high path in poultry, H5N1 in dairy cattle, and then avian metapneumovirus in poultry. 871 avian metapneumovirus positive test cases since 2024. That's very underreported. Our poultry industry is pretty savvy at recognizing what this disease looks like. AMPV it's a upper respiratory disease. It's a reproductive disease. It messes with birds' immune system. It's really the great mimicker and magnifier. So one of the big issues with this, aside from high morbidity or high infectious cases, is it looks a lot like avian influenza. So high path and avian metapneumovirus can look very similar. Sometimes they have co-infection. So protocols that our producers have come up with is they test for highly pathogenic avian influenza. If it comes back negative, it's likely this avian metapneumovirus. Very devastating to our poultry industry. This is not discerning. It affects all ages of birds. And it's considered, I think this is my next slide, it's considered reportable in Minnesota, but there really is no official response other than they report it to the Board of Animal Health. It's not a nationally reportable disease like we consider highly pathogenic avian influenza, where there's indemnity and other things that we can do to support the industry. So this is, the extent that we're able to assist is really record keeping and mapping where the virus is. There is a vaccine that is available. It's a killed vaccine and has limited utility. It's got some effect, but not much. And there's been a big push to allow importation of modified live virus from some of our European partners to combat this disease. We had avian metapneumovirus, a different strain of this virus back in the early 2000s, and actually Minnesota was able to demonstrate the ability to eradicate the disease with a vaccination protocol. But the strains that we have now are different strains, require different vaccines. The vaccines that are most effective are available from Europe, but there's constraints from our USDA partners to import biologics, live biologics from countries that might also be carrying other diseases. So recently they have allowed the importation of some of these modified live vaccines. That's the first step. They are conducting tests to determine if there's any risk of those vaccines spreading disease amongst our domestic poultry, and then from there we will hopefully be allowed to incorporate that into a response strategy. I've assured the poultry industry that when given the green light, Minnesota will be the first to approve importation of the vaccine to give some reprieve to our poultry industry. Response fatigue. So I talked about a lot of stuff that's going on, and that's kind of day to day. It's interesting. I get when we're interviewing new staff, I get the question often, what is a typical day at the Board of Animal Health? And there is no typical day at the Board of Animal Health, because we get notification bright and early, or sometimes in the middle of the night, that we've got a new case of high path or screwworm is on our southern border, or there's just any number of things. So this is just a breakdown of hours spent by board staff last year. So close to 9,000 hours on the high path response. That's going to include some 1,100 hours of overtime. And this isn't including our response activities with the dairy response, the H5N1 in dairy cattle, or the activities that our poultry division is taking on with the AMPV response. This is in conjunction with our partners at Department of Ag, USDA, and then Department of Health. So this is all in addition to our day-to-day. So we have other inspection activities and monitoring that we are also expected to do in the meantime. And then that last bullet point is pretty important too. This is deeply personal for veterinarians dedicated to caring for animals. So this, when I started in 2019, I was fortunate or unfortunate to be tasked with working with the depopulation efforts in the swine industry. Big eye opener. I didn't go to vet school to learn how to most efficiently, most effectively kill the most healthy animals I could. So that extends to our personnel working on this. We're limited. We've got a great staff, great partners, but there's a limit. Next slide. 20% of our funding also comes from federal funds. Similar to Department of Ag, we do get some cooperative agreement funds, but the bullet point on top is worth noting. Federal funding is not guaranteed. They did cut our funding last year due to increases in budget needs at their agency. And there's always the what if with the new administration coming in. We don't know how response is going to change. We don't know how active or how much USDA will be participating in the response activities and how much of that will fall to the states. Minnesota has a legacy in dealing with animal disease. We are looked to as the leaders, specifically in high-path avian influenza and avian metapneumovirus. So we are the ones that other states are looking to and need to maintain that level of performance and that level of research into these. I'm going to mention again, the disease is not going to recede. We are not going to see less high-path avian influenza. We're seeing this virus. It's a flu virus. It's going to keep changing like our human flu virus does. And we're going to have different ways that we need to manage and attack and respond to it. With that, I need to focus on ensuring that the board has the resources and capabilities to maintain that service. One other thing that isn't obvious here is the tethering effect to these disease responses. So by that I mean we have diseases going on constantly. This was not typical 3 years ago at the Board of Animal Health. We were always on alert. Now we are constantly in response mode. We rarely stand down our emergency response team. So this is where the tethering effect comes into place. It does not allow myself or some of our team members to engage in other activities that we have invitations to. There are national committees that I've been asked to join. There's national meetings that Dr. Voss, our program director for the poultry industry or poultry programs, has been asked to present at. And frankly, it's difficult to leave town when we know these things are on our doorsteps and it's all hands on deck. We have to be around. So with that, I think that's my last slide. And I will entertain questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. And I want to say and ask you a favor as well, is if you could pass on to your staff our appreciation and the appreciation of everyone in Minnesota. 1,000 hours of overtime dealing with emergencies. That sounds pretty awful. And when you're at perpetual emergency, does it cease being an emergency and is just a condition that's untenable? Because this sounds pretty rough. I did have a more concrete question for you, though, that emanates from a conversation I had with Eric Sawatsky, who's a turkey producer. And you've been promoted. You've gotten all kinds of degrees today. Commissioner Peterson, Dr. Commissioner Peterson Esquire, earlier he and I were talking about this as well, and that's about a hopeful vaccine for high path that's potentially coming our way. And I have two questions for you on that front. If you are familiar with the progress and the development of that vaccine, and if you have any kind of sense of whether or not the state would have a role in facilitating its dissemination.
Chair Putnam, yes. Erica Swatsky is the president of our board of directors, so very well acquainted with her. We have a lot of conversations about this.
I talked with the other one, though. Sorry about that, her husband.
Oh, Eric, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, assistant to our president, yes. Yeah, so the vaccine exists for avian influenza. But as you can imagine, influenza vaccines are of limited value if you don't have the right strain. So early on in the incursion of avian influenza in the United States, there was very robust activity to get a viable vaccine candidate, and I believe they have several on ice somewhere. The rest of the equation, however, is international trade. So there are restrictions when it comes to what we can and can't use in our livestock production that will hamper our ability to engage in international commerce. So at this point, it's not allowed. I'm a staunch believer in vaccines. I'm a doctor. We got to vaccinate. So, and I know my industry is suffering. My poultry industry needs some help. This is not going away. Without adding more tools to the toolbox, we can just count on more suffering and more loss.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. Members do have questions. Senator Weber, then Senator Kunish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Hayes, for your report. With the increased activity your agency has had regarding the high path and the transferability to dairy, how are you sitting with your current budget?
Dr. Hayes.
Chair Putnam, Senator, tight. Our current budget is tight. We are pinching where we need to make it through the fiscal year, and then anticipating what the next biennium looks like. I've got great staff that are very good at managing our budget and maintaining where we need to be. Currently, pending anything huge, I think we are sitting in a good spot. We have support with our friends at the Department of Agriculture too, with emergency funding. So my bigger concern is what we don't know and what keeps getting added. Some other things I didn't point out. So with this disease response, we rely heavily on our federal partners in state. So there are USDA staff members that work hand in hand with the Board of Animal Health doing a lot of our day-to-day activities. They get pulled away. They get deployed to other states to effectively work on the response in California, Ohio, some of those areas, which again limits our ability to do our day-to-day work. Did I answer your question? That was an odd way to stop. I had more and I forgot where I was going with that. But again, my point is, I think we're sitting okay as long as things don't change drastically. But that doesn't take into consideration some of the day-to-day activities that are creating more of a bottleneck for us, because we're limited on our resources, our personnel to be able to get all those things done if we get another response.
Follow-up, Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to be honest with you, I haven't had an opportunity to review the budget that the governor came out with, but how has your agency fared in that arena at this point?
Dr. Hayes.
Chair Putnam, Senator, we were, the governor's budget suggested an allowance for cost of living increase for our budget. I think it was 126,000 was the increase suggested. I will say that covers cost of living increase, but it doesn't cover the additional duties that we're tasked with. Other things I didn't point out, there's a new pilot policy that is being imposed on Minnesota and South Dakota that requires additional testing of turkeys going to slaughter within 72 hours of slaughter to determine if this virus has any potential of getting into the food chain. So I guess my point with that is, and I didn't want to belabor it, but we keep getting asked to do more and more, and with basically the same budget.
Senator Westrom? Sorry, Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with the budget restrictions, what areas do you have available to pull back on if that need arises?
Dr. Hayes.
Chair Putnam and Senator, we have some testing that we are not obligated to do for the poultry industry that we have earmarked as a potential area that we need to pull back on. We don't want to do that. That's a service that's been provided to the poultry industry in Minnesota for years, but it's something that we have alerted them that if the budget constraints are such, we would pull back on some of the testing that we were doing, and it would become their responsibility to pay. They don't have to not do the testing. They have to pay for those tests then.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Dr. Haves. I guess I would simply say that we all recognize that there are going to have to be budgets that are cut, but having chaired the Ag Policy Committee for 4 years and having lived through the first round of high-path avian influenza and the hog situation in 2020 when we had our shutdowns of our packing plants, is certainly, I think, both our Department of Ag and our Board of Animal Health are two agencies that have never been given an extremely large amount of operating cash to deal with all the responsibilities that they're given. And I certainly hope that as we go forward, we need to recognize that they provide a service not just to the agricultural community, but to every Minnesotan, ensuring safety of product and what have you. And so with that, thank you for what you do, and that's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Weber. We completely agree. You should stick around. That's a good one. Senator Kunish.
Yes, thank you for the incredible work you all do and the time and effort you put into it and the loss of sleep that you all have. We're right there with you in a lot of the ways. My question is, what are these threats to human beings, to the transferring to humans, and not just humans, but like pets, dogs, cats that might, eat an egg that has from an animal that has the virus, or if we were to drink, if there are people out there that drink unpasteurized milk and they happen to drink milk that this virus might be found in. What are the side effects, and does this have a potential to perhaps become something worse than we would, that we can imagine?
Dr. Hayes.
Chair Putnam, Senator, great question, and I'm just on pins and needles waiting to answer that one. So the threat is real, and you're going to hear this from our counterparts at the Department of Health. They will suggest that this is the next pandemic just waiting to happen. So currently the main signs that we will see in people is usually pink eye or conjunctivitis. That seems to be the most common signs that the current strain is developing, with the exception of those critical cases that actually had upper respiratory signs. Very, very infectious to cats and felines in general. I say it like that because we had a recent report of some big cat sanctuaries out in Washington and Oregon, as well as a couple of domestic cats that succumbed to this virus that it was determined was from raw pet food that had contained something that was either a meat product that was tainted with the virus. So it's very devastating to those animals. In general, most of those kinds of sanctuaries are, this isn't a zoo. It's not like an accredited zoo that's very careful with the way they're feeding their animals. These are more kind of backyard, I guess, if you will, animal sanctuaries. But nonetheless, they lost, I think, 20 big cats, including tigers, lions, cougars, little of everything. So very, very big risk to cats. We see this in our domestic cats too. Just one might call them the canary in the coal mine on some of our dairy farms, because sometimes that's the first sign that there is circulating virus on a dairy farm. The cats drinking the milk are dying, developing neurologic signs. To your question about the human risk, I think that's the big one that's going to keep America awake at night. There's a lot of reports on this. CDC is very concerned that this virus is changing, becoming more infectious. It's, we keep very close tabs on the strains, and that's why I'm talking about D1.1, B3.13. It's, they can check markers on the DNA to determine, is this more infectious to people, and then what's it going to cause? we've gotten very sophisticated, but that's the concern. In other countries, it's caused some very devastating pandemics, loss of lives and more. It's the flu virus. It's looking to change and become more infectious. Viruses in general need to do that. They have to find more hosts, more sources, otherwise they just die out. So typically what happens is they get very devastatingly infectious. So the first time you get the virus, it's nasty, and then it becomes less nasty but more infectious. So it's just that's the concern. It's getting into animals that are in close contact with people, and then also food products that come from those animals that could also get into the food supply.
Follow-up?
Senator Kunish.
So do you know, is anybody working on a vaccination for humans? Just in anticipation of this? I don't know if it's showing up in humans, and so you can't even start until that happens, which would be, really sad. But are they already kind of working proactively on a vaccination?
Chair Putnam and Senator, it's a little bit out of my realm, but yes, there's work on that. The problem is it's a flu virus, and they can develop vaccines, and they're good, for 24 hours, and then the virus changes. So it's difficult to develop an effective flu virus. Also, the amount of people at risk now is not warranting a robust kind of response. There's certainly activity and research going into it. It hasn't made it to the level that they're starting trials and considering vaccinating people, but there are discussions about certainly farm workers that are closely exposed, people like my agency that are charged with doing the depopulation and being right in there with those diseased and infected birds. So there is some discussion going on, but I don't know where it's at just yet. I should also mention there was a research done in dairy cattle, so developing a vaccine for dairy cattle. And I was pleased to approve the research in Minnesota. There is a dairy in Minnesota that is undergoing research trials for the vaccine in dairy cattle. If my optimism is right, we may never need to use that in dairy cattle, but I think it's a step in the right direction to suggest we can use it in other species. If it's domestic cats, if it's poultry eventually, if it's people. I think that's all helpful in the research and learning more about the virus and understanding how to control it.
Thank you, Senator Kunish. This is great. So one of the things I just mentioned to Nick is we were talking about how HHS, Health and Human Services, had a hearing yesterday to hear from the Department of Human Services about potential implications or effects for humans. And so we're going to talk and think about perhaps as a committee about potentially doing a joint hearing to talk about some of the consequences, and so we get sort of everything out on the table to make sure that we're ahead of this instead of far behind. So thank you, Senator Kunish, for that line of questioning. Senator Kupek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Haves, too, for all your work. I'll echo my colleagues here. I want to circle back to, you mentioned about kennels, and there was some ambiguity maybe about jurisdiction about that. Could you expound a little bit more on that?
Dr. Haves.
Chair Putnam and Senator, yeah, it's confusing how jurisdiction works. So we are the agency charged with licensing kennels and breeders and dealers. Oddly, we don't have the authority to inspect or investigate facilities that aren't licensed, if that makes any sense. So we're only allowed to inspect licensed kennels. So the question or the concern or the kind of the hiccup is we get a lot of reports of, hey, did you know so-and-so is raising dogs? And I think they're a kennel, I think they're a breeder. But we can ask to inspect their facilities, but they can decline because we do not oversee them. So I know the Minnesota Vet Medical Association is working on some language, bill language, to try to improve that. And we've been working in conjunction with them to kind of streamline that process a little bit to be able to have a little more authority in the right ways.
Senator Kubek.
Well, and just like you anticipate, hopefully, these diseases, you anticipated my next question, so thanks.
Members, further questions for Dr. Haves, the Board of Mental Health. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Haves, thank you for your presentation. It's really eye-opening to see the ramifications of this virus and other things. And I'm just wondering, You know, the federal farm bill has been kind of delayed on a regular basis. Does that have any effect on you and your going forward for your budget and for other things that might be concerning for you from your standpoint?
Dr. Haves.
Chair Putnam, Senator, it doesn't directly affect us. We don't receive farm bill funding per se, but we do support a lot of the farm bill research that's going on. So I've got a lot of letters of support that come across my desk regarding grants related to the farm bill. So and grants directly related to what would be affecting us. So that's why I support them, because they're going to help us with our disease response, help understand some of the diseases we're dealing with, how to better prepare for them. So indirectly, we are affected by that.
Senator Anderson. Members, any further questions or comments? Thank you very much, Dr. Hayes, for, again, a very thorough and sobering but educational presentation.
Thank you.
Members, that's it for today. Going forward, we will have a meeting of the Subcommittee on Veterans and Military Affairs on Monday. So those of you who are not serving on that committee get the day off. Then when we come back on the subsequent Wednesday, Senator Westrom will be chair, and he'll let us know what he's talking about next week. Thanks for being here. We're now adjourned.